I never expected her to remember my name. Not after all those years. Not after everything else had changed. Most evenings, I stopped at the same little convenience store on the corner before heading back to my apartment. It wasn't special, just fluorescent lights, a humming refrigerator wall, and a coffee machine that made a tired, grinding noise every time someone pressed a button. Still, I went there almost every night around 10, partly because it stayed open late, partly because it was on the way home, and lately, partly because she worked there. The first time I noticed her, I almost didn't recognize her at all. She stood behind the counter wearing a dark green cardigan over the store uniform. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, cut just above her shoulders now, and there were soft lines near her eyes that hadn't been there years ago. But when she looked up, something familiar flickered across her face. "Wait," she said, squinting slightly. "Aren't you Daniel?" It caught me off guard. I stood there holding a cup under the coffee machine, watching the dark liquid drip slowly. "Yeah," I said. Yeah, that's me." She smiled in a quiet way, like she wasn't completely sure yet, but liked the possibility. "You used to come over after school," she said. "With my son, Ryan." That's when it clicked. Ryan's mom. Back in high school, his house had been the place everyone gathered. Video games in the basement. Pizza boxes stacked on the kitchen counter. His mom moving in and out of rooms in the background like part of the house itself. But back then she'd been different. Not older exactly, just further away somehow, like adults always were. Now she was standing 3 feet in front of me, scanning a candy bar while the register beeped softly. "Ryan moved to Chicago last year," she added, almost casually. "Job thing." "Oh," I said. There was a short pause. I suddenly realized my coffee had already filled the cup and was spilling slowly over the rim. I pulled it away too late, wiping the side with a napkin while she laughed under her breath. "You still do that," she said. "Do what?" "Zone out." I folded the napkin once. Then again. I guess some habits stick. After that night, I started noticing small things. The way she leaned her elbows lightly on the counter when the store got quiet. The way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear while counting change. Sometimes we'd talk for a minute or two. Nothing serious. "How's work going? You still living around here?" "Cold tonight, huh?" Normal things. But every once in a while she'd say something that felt oddly specific. Like remembering I used to hate olives when Ryan's family ordered pizza, or that I always picked the corner seat at their dining table. One night she slid my coffee across the counter before I even asked. "2 sugars," she said. I blinked. "You remember that?" She shrugged, but her smile lingered for a second longer than usual. I remember a lot of things. After that, leaving the store started feeling strange. I'd stand outside for a second longer than necessary, watching the reflection of the fluorescent lights in the glass door. Sometimes she'd still be behind the counter. Sometimes she'd glance up, and sometimes we'd both look away at the exact same moment. I don't think either of us meant for it to become a routine, but loneliness has a way of turning small moments into anchors. My phone stayed mostly quiet these days. Old group chats faded. Unsent messages sat in drafts. Yet somehow, every night around 10, I found myself standing under those humming lights again, folding napkins, pretending I needed another coffee. And last Tuesday, just as I pushed open the door to leave, she said something that made me stop. "Hey, Daniel." I turned back. She hesitated, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the counter. Then she said, almost carefully, "Do you ever still stay up late, like you used to?" I wasn't sure what she meant, but the way she asked it made the quiet store suddenly feel different. And later that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, my phone lit up. A message from a number I hadn't saved yet. "Still awake." My phone stayed lit in the dark for a long time. "Still awake." That was all the message said. No name, no explanation, but I already knew who it was. I sat on the edge of my bed, thumbs hovering over the screen like I was about to touch something fragile. Finally, I typed back. "Yeah." A few seconds passed. Then another message appeared. "Good." I was starting to think I imagined that conversation. I smiled without realizing it. For a moment, I just stared at the words. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the old ceiling fan above me. "You mean about staying up late?" I wrote. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then came back again. "You used to sit in our kitchen past midnight with Ryan," she replied. eating cereal, and talking about things like you were already adults. I leaned back against the wall, remembering the yellow kitchen light in their old house. The way the clock above the stove always ticked a little too loudly. I think we mostly talked nonsense, I wrote. Maybe, she replied. But you were the only one who always stayed behind to help me clean the dishes. That stopped me. I didn't remember doing that. Or maybe I had, and it just never seemed important at the time. Another message came through. I always thought you were a quiet kid. I typed something, erased it, then typed again. Still am. A pause followed. Then she sent something that made my chest tighten slightly. Quiet people usually notice the most. The next night when I stopped by the store, she was pouring hot water into a small metal thermos behind the counter. When she saw me walk in, her mouth curved slightly. Thought you might come by. You sound pretty confident about that. She shrugged and slid the thermos toward the edge of the counter. Tea, she said. The coffee machine started tasting like burnt cardboard. I leaned against the counter while she poured some into a small paper cup. The steam curled softly between us. You always liked tea? I asked. Not always. She handed me the cup carefully, our fingers almost brushing. Picked it up during the divorce. She said it lightly, but the words sat there between us for a moment. Oh, I said quietly. Yeah, she added, glancing down at the register. Turns out sitting alone at night makes you try different habits. I took a sip. It tasted like ginger and something floral. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights sliding across the store windows. You must think it's strange, she said suddenly. What? She looked up at me again. This. She gestured vaguely between us. Talking like this. I rubbed the rim of the paper cup with my thumb. A little, I admitted, because I'm Ryan's mom. That too. She laughed softly under her breath. Well, she said, at least you're honest. Another quiet pause followed. I caught myself noticing her hands resting on the counter. Thin silver ring, slightly chipped nail polish, fingers tapping gently like she was thinking about something she hadn't decided to say yet. You ever hear from him? I asked. Ryan, she said. Yeah. Sometimes. Her voice softened. Mostly texts. She looked out the window for a moment. It's strange when your kid grows up and leaves, she said quietly. The house gets bigger somehow. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just stayed there, standing across from her with the tea warming my hands. After a minute, she looked back at me again, studying my face like she was remembering something. You know, she said slowly, you don't look lonely. I let out a small breath. That's because you're seeing me during my one social activity of the day. That made her laugh, an actual laugh this time. Then, as she pushed the thermos closer to me again, her hand rested briefly over mine. Just for a second. Take it, she said. You could bring it back tomorrow. Her hand lingered a moment longer before pulling away. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The thermos stayed on my kitchen counter longer than it probably should have. 3 days. Every night, I told myself I'd bring it back. Every night, something delayed me. Work running late. Rain starting just as I stepped outside. Once I even walked halfway to the store before turning around for no real reason. It wasn't about the thermos. Not really. Still, on the 4th night, I finally picked it up and went. The convenience store looked the same as always, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, the glass doors fogged a little from the cold outside. But when I stepped in, she wasn't behind a counter. A younger guy stood there scrolling on his phone. Hey, he said without looking up. I stood there for a second, holding the thermos. Is Linda, he finished. She switched shifts this week. Something in my chest shifted too. Oh, morning now, he added. Started yesterday. I nodded slowly like that explained everything. Maybe it did. I left the thermos on the counter. Could you give this to her? He glanced at it. Sure. I walked out into the cold air, feeling oddly unfinished, like a conversation had ended mid-sentence somewhere. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. Not because I had to, just earlier. By the time I realized where I was walking, I was already halfway down the block. The store looked different in daylight. Less lonely somehow. She stood behind the counter pouring coffee when the door chimed. She looked up, and for a second her expression went completely still. Daniel, I rubbed the back of my neck. Yeah, I heard you switch shifts. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the thermos sitting behind the counter. I wondered who left that. I was going to bring it myself, I said. Just took a few days. She smiled a little. I noticed. A customer walked in behind me, grabbing a soda from the fridge. The moment stretched quietly while she rang him up. Neither of us spoke. After he left, the store felt strangely smaller. You came all the way here this early just for that? She asked, nodding toward the thermos. Maybe. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. Maybe. I shrugged. Maybe I got used to the routine. That made her look down at the counter for a second. Her fingers traced the edge of a receipt slowly. You shouldn't, she said softly. I frowned. Shouldn't what? Get used to things like that. She looked up again, but there was something careful in her expression now, like she was measuring the distance between us. It's easy to misunderstand quiet moments, she added. I leaned against the counter. Are you saying I'm misunderstood? I'm saying, she exhaled slowly. You were my son's friend. The words weren't harsh, just factual. Still, they landed heavier than I expected. Right, I said. A small silence settled between us again. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the window. She reached for the thermos, twisting the lid slowly. You know, she said almost lightly, Ryan would laugh if he saw us standing here like this. Probably. Her eyes met mine then. Neither of us looked away. The store felt very quiet. Too quiet. I noticed the faint scent of her shampoo when she leaned forward slightly to place the thermos back on the counter between us. Our hands moved at the same time. Her fingers brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Just a second too long. Then she said softly, almost under her breath, we should probably, but she didn't finish. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like we both leaned closer without meaning to. Close enough that I could hear her inhale. Close enough that if either of us moved an inch more, someone behind me cleared their throat. A man waiting at the register. We stepped back at the exact same time, and suddenly neither of us knew where to look. After that morning, things didn't go back to normal. Not that there had been a normal to begin with, but something about that almost moment at the counter, the way we both stepped back when the customer cleared his throat, it stayed in my head longer than it should have. For the next few days, I told myself not to go. That seemed like the easiest solution. Simple rule. Just stop walking into that store. But habits are stubborn things. And loneliness even more. So a week later, I found myself outside again, hands in my jacket pockets, staring through the glass like someone deciding whether to enter a room they weren't sure they belonged in. She was closing. Lights dimmed. Chairs stacked near the small counter by the window. When she noticed me standing there, she hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. You're late, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something cautious underneath it. Store's closed. I can see that. For a second, we just stood there. Then she sighed quietly and stepped aside. Come in, just for a minute. The air inside smelled faintly like cleaning spray and stale coffee. She was wiping down the counter with a cloth, movements slow and deliberate. I leaned against the shelf near the window. You switched shifts, I said. You noticed. You disappeared. That made her stop wiping. Just for a second. Then she continued again, slower this time. I didn't disappear, she said. I just moved my schedule. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she folded the cloth neatly and set it beside the register. Because, she said finally, I started looking forward to 10 o'clock. The words landed softly. Too softly to pretend they meant nothing. I swallowed. Is that a bad thing? She let out a quiet breath. It can be. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. She walked around the counter and leaned against it across from me, arms crossed loosely. You're 26, she said. 27. That doesn't help your argument. I smiled a little. I wasn't making one. Her eyes lingered on my face a second longer than usual. That's the problem, she said. What is? You make things feel, she searched for the word. Easy. I looked down at the floor tiles. I don't think this feels easy. That made her laugh under her breath. Fair point. A quiet settled between us again. The kind that doesn't feel empty. Just full of things nobody wants to say first. Finally, she spoke again. Ryan called yesterday. That caught me off guard. Oh, He asked if anyone from high school still lived around here. My chest tightened slightly. What did you say? She studied my face carefully, like she was measuring the impact of every word. I said yes. Another pause. And I asked, and I didn't mention you. Something in the room shifted again. Not relief exactly. Not guilt either. Just awareness. The kind that makes two people suddenly realize they're standing closer than they thought. She looked down at her hands for a moment. When you walked in tonight, she said quietly, I told myself I was going to say something responsible. Responsible. Like, Daniel, this is a bad idea. And she looked up again. Her eyes softer now. Tired maybe. Then you walked in and stood there like you always do. I felt my throat tighten. Like what? She stepped a little closer. Not much. Just enough that I could see the faint lines near her eyes again. Like someone who's waiting for permission, she said. My heart started beating a little harder than usual. And are you going to give it? The question came out quieter than I meant it to. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes moved from my face to my hands, then back again. She stepped closer once more. Close enough that the silence between us felt almost fragile. And then she asked softly, Daniel, do you even know what you're asking for? The night she asked that question, neither of us answered it. Daniel, do you even know what you're asking for? The words stayed in the air like something fragile that neither of us wanted to touch too quickly. I opened my mouth, closed it again, because the truth was, I didn't. Not completely. I knew I liked being near her. I knew the quiet between us didn't feel empty. I knew that when she looked at me like that, like she was remembering two different versions of me at once, it did something strange to my chest. But what exactly I was asking for? That part, I couldn't explain. She seemed to understand that. After a few seconds, she stepped back, just a small step, but enough to break the fragile closeness between us. You should go, she said softly. Not cold, not angry, just careful. I nodded. Yeah. Neither of us mentioned it again. Not that night. The next evening, I didn't go to the store. At first, it felt like discipline, like doing the responsible thing. But by the third night, it felt more like avoidance. I told myself she probably wanted space anyway. That maybe that whole conversation had been her way of gently ending whatever strange thing had started between us. Still, around 10 o'clock, my body kept noticing the time. My phone stayed quiet. No messages. No still awake. Just the dull glow of the screen and a half-written text I kept opening and closing. Hey, too casual. About the other night. Too serious. I deleted both. A week passed before I saw her again. Not at the store. At the grocery market across town. I almost didn't notice her at first. She stood near the produce section, holding a basket and studying a row of apples like she was trying to decide something important. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. For a moment, we both froze slightly, like two people who had rehearsed different versions of this moment, but weren't sure which one to perform. Hey, she said. Hey. The words sat between us. You haven't been coming by, she said after a moment. I shrugged lightly. You changed shifts. That's not the reason. I didn't answer. She studied my face for a second longer, like she was deciding whether to say something else. Finally, she looked down at the basket in her hands. I should have explained something the other night, she said. My chest tightened slightly. Explained what? She hesitated, then said quietly, my ex-husband moved back to town. I blinked. Oh, he's been stopping by the store sometimes, she added, trying to talk. Something about the way, she said, made it clear those conversations weren't pleasant. That's complicated, I said. She gave a small, tired smile. Yeah. We stood there for another few seconds, the grocery store noise humming softly around us. Then someone called her name. A man's voice from the other aisle. She stiffened slightly. I should go, she said quickly. Before I could respond, she walked away. I didn't see the man she joined, only the back of her green cardigan disappearing around the corner. That night, I opened my phone again, typed a message. If things are messy right now, I get it. I stared at the screen for a long time, then added another line. But I meant what I said, except I hadn't actually said anything that night, which made the message feel unfinished. I hovered over the send button, then locked the phone instead. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. like life had forgotten to finish the sentence. And for the first time in weeks, 10 o'clock passed without me standing under those humming fluorescent lights. A few days after the grocery store, I stopped pretending I wasn't thinking about her. It was late evening, the kind of quiet hour when the neighborhood feels pause between dinner and sleep. I found myself walking the familiar street again, hands deep in my jacket pockets, the cool air brushing against my face. Her house looked almost exactly the same as it had years ago. Same small porch, same porch light glowing warm against the dark. I hadn't stood here since high school. Back then, Ryan and I would sit on the steps arguing about music or video games while his mom moved around inside the kitchen, visible through the window for a few seconds at a time. Now the house felt quieter. I stood there for a long minute, thinking about knocking, thinking about walking away. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text. "You're outside, aren't you?" I looked up at the porch light again, then toward the window. The curtain shifted slightly. I exhaled. Yeah, I typed back. A few seconds later, the front door opened. She stepped onto the porch wearing a loose sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back like she'd been getting ready for bed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You still stand the same way," she said finally. "What way?" "Like you're deciding whether you belong somewhere." I let out a small breath. "Maybe I still am." She leaned lightly against the porch railing. "You could have texted." "I tried." "What stopped you?" I looked down at my phone in my hand. Didn't know what the sentence was supposed to be. She studied my face quietly, then nodded a little, like she understood that more than she wanted to admit. The street behind me was silent, except for a dog barking somewhere far away. "Ryan used to sit right there," she said suddenly, pointing to the second porch step, "complaining about homework." I sat down on the step almost automatically. "Yeah," I said. "I remember." After a moment, she sat beside me. Not too close, but close enough that I could hear her breathing when the wind quieted. For a while we just sat there, the porch light humming softly above us. "I thought about what you said," she said finally. "I didn't say much. You asked if I was going to give you permission." I rubbed my hands together slowly. "Right." She looked down at the step between us. Part of me wanted to say yes. The words came out calm, but they landed hard in my chest. "And the other part?" I asked. "The part that knows how complicated things get." I nodded. "That's fair." Another pause. She glanced toward me again. "You stopped coming by. I thought you wanted distance." I didn't say that. "You didn't have to." For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Instead, she just sighed quietly. "I'm not good at this," she admitted. "At what?" "At being the person someone waits for." I turned slightly toward her. "I wasn't waiting." No, I said honestly. "I just didn't want to pretend this didn't mean something." Her eyes softened a little, even knowing it might go nowhere. Especially knowing that. The wind rustled the trees along the street. She sat there thinking about that for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, she reached over and rested her hand on top of mine. Warm, steady, not dramatic, just real. "You're a good man, Daniel," she said quietly. I looked down at her hands, then back at her. "Is that a goodbye?" She held my gaze for a second longer, then shook her head slightly. "No." Her fingers squeezed mine once. Soft, certain, just an honest place to start. I nodded. "Okay." And for the first time since all of this began, the silence between us didn't feel uncertain. Just shared. The first thing that changed wasn't something dramatic. It was the time. For a while, 10 o'clock stopped meaning anything special. I didn't walk to the convenience store anymore, and she didn't send late-night messages asking if I was still awake. Instead, morning started appearing. Not suddenly, just gradually. A week after that night on her porch, she texted me around 8:47 a.m. "You ever tried the tea from that bakery on Maple Street?" I hadn't. But 30 minutes later, I was standing outside the small bakery, watching people carry paper bags and coffee cups through the chilly morning air. She arrived a few minutes later, wearing the same green cardigan I remembered from the store. "You came," she said, a little surprised. "You texted. That doesn't always work. For you it does." She rolled her eyes slightly, but smiled anyway. Inside, we sat by the window with 2 small cups of tea and 1 black coffee she insisted on ordering for me. "You still drink it like this?" she asked, sliding the cup toward me. "Still bitter," I said. You never liked sweet things. I didn't say that. She laughed quietly into her tea. That became our routine. Not every day, but often enough that the woman at the bakery started recognizing us. Some mornings we talked about simple things, work, books, the strange customers she used to get at the store. Other mornings we sat in silence, watching the street wake up. No pressure, no big conversation about what we were. Just two people showing up. Ryan eventually came home to visit. That was awkward at first. We ran into him one afternoon outside the same bakery. His eyes moved from me to his mom and back again. "Daniel," he said. "Hey." Then he looked at her. "You too." She answered before I could. "We've been getting tea sometimes." Ryan stared at us for a second longer, then shrugged. "Honestly, that explains a lot." "Explains what?" she asked. "You both look less miserable than usual." He walked inside before either of us could respond. She shook her head. "That boy has terrible timing." Still honest, though. Too honest. But she was smiling when she said it. Months passed quietly. Nothing about it felt rushed. Sometimes we met for tea at the bakery. Sometimes we sat on her porch steps the way Ryan and I used to years ago. The same porch light humming above us. One night, she handed me a familiar metal thermos. "You forgot this," she said. "I returned that months ago. You brought it back again." I twisted the lid open and smelled the faint ginger tea inside. Guess it keeps finding its way back. Maybe it belongs to someone who stays up late. I looked over at her. "Still awake?" I asked. She smiled in that quiet way that had started everything. Most nights. The street was calm, the air cool. Nothing dramatic. Just the sound of leaves moving and two people sitting close enough to share the silence. And sometimes I think about how all of it started. Not with a big moment. Not with some sweeping confession. Just a quiet store, a remembered name, and a message sent late at night. Still awake. Funny thing is, I think we both were. Just waiting for the right hour.